Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I am Karl, Cassell, your moderator for today, founder and CEO of Perhaps Today Incorporated. Many have called blockchain or Bitcoin the internet of money. Others have called it a fraud. Still many know not much about it at all, while others have gotten off the sideline and bought, mined, or just started researching what it is. This new phenomena is called blockchain technology. It is a platform that, as many that have heard the term Bitcoin, it's created on this platform that we call blockchain. So some that have heard of it and even experimented in the space, it is just as much as a mystery to them as we are just scratching the surface on this technology, especially to those on Main Street. Today we hope to learn as much as we possibly can in this short period of time, so you, the viewer, can be a little more educated on what this technology is doing and where we expect it to go. I have joining me this morning three people who represent the voices of many of you. First, I have Zachary Bohannon, who is project manager at the YMCA. Good morning.
Morning, thanks for having me.
Next to him, we have Justin Wasson, who is a small business owner and a finance major. Good morning.
Morning, Karl.
And on our end, we have Cameron Schorg, who is a University of Iowa student, otherwise known as the Bitcoin guy.
Morning.
Good morning. And so we're going to jump right into our questions, and please really give our audience an opportunity to delve a little bit more into this topic. We would hope that they would do some research on their own. So first, let's start out. What is blockchain, and how is it going to affect the areas of our lives here in the very near future? And can it be used outside of the cryptocurrency space?
Yeah, so blockchain is really a database innovation. It's a new way to track and store value and transfer of value. And Bitcoin is the most familiar familiar currency on top of this technology, but there are many other types of currencies, and that kind of alludes to what you're talking about. Can it be used for other applications outside of the currency applications? And the answer is yes.
Okay. Anybody want to add? Okay. So because blockchain is the reason most know about Bitcoin, how and why was Bitcoin created?
Absolutely, I'll take that one. So Bitcoin was created, it was first, I believe, invented by, in a white paper in 2008. It was at the depths of the financial crisis, and it was by a pseudonym named Satoshi Nakamoto, I believe.
Satoshi Nakamoto, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And he or she, whoever it is, it's one of those things, it was a pseudonym created that the true creator hasn't really came out and taken credit for. But it was created, and in January 3rd, 2009, it was officially brought to the market. And Bitcoin was brought to the market at this time, and it was based on a half-life of every 4 years, that you have these miners that go in and you mine the Bitcoin. And the first 4 years, the half-life is 4 years, the first 4 years you get 50 Bitcoins for every mining you get. And every 4 years after that, it decreases in half. So it goes from 50 to 25. We're now in the third half-life of now you get 12.5 Bitcoins per every mine. In short, it's a very energy inefficient way to create, to mine a currency, but that's, I guess, something that we'll get into in a second.
Okay. Justin, earlier Cameron called it a currency. What say you?
I mean, if you want to call this a currency, I think you can call just about anything a currency. Anything that really possesses value, you could inevitably, in a way, call it a currency. It's not a formal currency like what you'd think of like a dollar, I don't think. You can perhaps use it as exchange, but you can also use services as exchange. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's really a formal currency in the sense that you think of the dollar.
Okay, and so we have heard the term currency, holder of value. As long as people look at something as a holder of value, isn't it as as valuable as those people who are either exchanging it or using it as they believe it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think money is not value itself, it's only a representation of value. So whatever that may be, as Justin said, whether that be a service or a seashell or a piece of paper, money really is what has valuable or value to it of what we give it. So when it comes to what money actually is, it really functions as one of three things, and you hit on one of them. One of them is a store of value, but the other two forms of functions of money are a unit of account and a means of exchange. And so certain types of money or certain types of currency, whether that be a seashell or a piece of paper, are better and worse at functions of the money.
I'm going to dive into that. So every industry has their fundamentals of whatever that industry represents. And in finance, money, the fundamentals, as Cam just mentioned, I think it's a topic we need to dive into even further, is that the three fundamentals of money is that you have a unit of account, a store of value, and a medium of exchange, as you just mentioned. Just to touch into those further, unit of account is just the predictable purchasing power. So, for example, the average consumer, when they want to go buy a mortgage and go to the bank and buy a house, they know exactly what the house is worth. They're going to go buy a house for $250,000, and they know the mortgage they're taking out with interest is upwards of $300,000, $350,000. So, in layman's terms, that's what unit of account is. The other one is store of value. The store of value is just quite, frankly, is for Bitcoin, it's a fixed amount, where unlike what we moved away from when we had the gold standard back with the central bank, that there was a fixed amount of currency based on the gold. So the money was based on gold, where that's the same as Bitcoin. Unlike today, the irony of the whole Bitcoin phenomenon is that it was created at the depths of the financial crisis, as I mentioned, to get away from the threat of what a financial crisis caused. But you can't, when a fixed amount continues to go out in Bitcoin, you can't take care of a financial crisis, because unlike a central bank, you can go ahead and take the currency and inject new currency into the system, where there's a fixed amount for the Bitcoin. So it's an awful store of value from that perspective. So when you look at the three fundamentals of what a currency is, it's fails at two of the three by itself, and you can even make the argument that the third one, medium of exchange, it would fail at as well.
Sure. So I'd like to hop into this a little bit. I think the store of value is the main one. I mean, Bitcoin, when it first came out, was only worth a few cents, and now it's worth about $12,000, $11,500, and it's very volatile up and down. So to touch on that point of store of value, if one day something's worth $10,000 and the next day it's worth $20,000, how's that a store of value? Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is a very new technology. It's a very new currency. It's been around for only 8 years. And when you look at other countries' currencies like Zimbabwe, and you look at, is that considered money or not? Most people would say it is. Is it a great store of value? Probably not. Now, to go on whether Bitcoin's a store of value because it has a limited supply or not, I actually think there's more of a case that it has more store of value because there is a limited amount. When you have a currency and the government can, whenever they want, print more money, every single time they print more money, your dollar has less purchasing power and less store of value, actually. So Bitcoin, because it's limited, is actually deflationary. And from that perspective, you can actually, I think, make a very strong argument that in the long run, there's more store of value in Bitcoin than there is in an arbitrary piece of paper that has no backing to it at all.
Justin, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I'll hit on that last point. I mean, I think there's something that differentiates Bitcoin from, example, our current dollar, which is that our current dollar actually is backed up by something. Bitcoin is backed up. I mean, it's a computer code, and it really doesn't have anything backing it up. The only thing that keeps Bitcoin's value is primarily, I think, it's two things. One is just speculation. It's this idea that maybe I can make some money if I purchase some. The other thing that I think is creating Bitcoin value is the illicit markets that it allows to really make more efficient. A lot of drug trades, a lot of it's called the dark web. There's a lot of markets that are created that have also, I think, boosted the price of this cryptocurrency. Unlike the dollar, which actually has backing, and I've gotten into arguments with people who say, well, there's nothing backing the dollar. Well, that's not accurate. We've got a military backing our dollar. We've got infrastructure backing our dollar. We've got a number of other things that actually back the dollar. So I know that, like Zach mentioned, we moved away from the gold standard, but there is still backing to our formal U.S. currency. And I think to deny that, I mean, I think really, it appears to me from studying a lot of different financial markets, it seems like we're creating a house of cards with this inflated Bitcoin price, and it really would steer me away from ever trying to invest in it.
So let me just kind of push back a little bit on the dark web and the illicit uses that Bitcoin creates. I would say for human trafficking, kind of the American way. Yep. What did we use then? We talk about illicit drug use. We're using fiat currencies to do that. So if that's people's reasoning for not wanting to use it, shouldn't we not use our current fiat currency system?
And since I brought it up, I mean, I would mention that, I mean, sure, there was, prior to Bitcoin, there was those same illicit activities, but Bitcoin allows it to be more efficient. It's a lot more secretive. There's websites specifically for these illicit trades, which you can't use cash for. You can't swipe a credit card because it's trackable. But Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can be used much more efficiently for these illicit activities.
I think, for one, as you mentioned, the US dollar is the #1 use for sex trafficking, for drugs, for weapon trafficking, for all those things. And to touch on exactly how much the Bitcoin markets are used for these illicit purposes. For one, Bitcoin is not anonymous, so it actually is trackable. You can see that flow of money from the very first Bitcoin that was ever mined to the last Bitcoin that was mined, and every transaction in between. It's public, and anyone can see that. So you're actually kind of dumb, honestly, to use Bitcoin, specifically that currency, as a means of exchange for illicit activities. And I think, you know, the second piece of that is that the amount of Bitcoin that's actually used on these illicit markets is less than 1% of the total market trading volume done on the Bitcoin markets. Now that may not have always been the case. You know, in the early days of Bitcoin, one of its first use cases was the dark web and for illicit activities. But when you look at other industries, like for example, video conferencing, the very first industry to use video conferencing was pornographers. Right. And so criminals are inherently the first ones to adopt new technologies, and so it's really short-sighted to look at this very first use case of Bitcoin and completely avoid the long-term picture of what a decentralized currency not issued by government and limited supply actually has.
Zach, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think we need to continue to make the distinction on is that everyone thinks when they look at Bitcoin and blockchain are one and the same. I know we kind of briefly touched on that. And I think that's the biggest misconception with this whole topic to begin with. Is Bitcoin was, I believe, the first cryptocurrency that was created based off of this blockchain technology. And fundamentally, blockchain technology is going to be innovative. It's going to be life-changing for a lot of us, and I will stand corrected if that ever is the case, but I just think as a case for Bitcoin by itself, it's one of those things that once you see regulators jump into the picture, that's when you saw the price of it tank. It went from upwards of 20,000 down to 5,500, on almost 5,000 over the last few months because of the threat of regulation. And that was one of the biggest things, is that I believe in the fundamental technology of blockchain. But from a Bitcoin, when it's a literally imaginary 31,000 coded computer program that was created out of thin air, it's one of those things that if it's backed by the Fed and once Fedcoin comes out,
oh my goodness,
then I'm all for it. But right now, Bitcoin is literally imaginary currency.
Certainly. So let me ask this question. Does the fiat currency market need to be concerned about cryptocurrency? So do the governments, or more importantly, the federal banks, the Federal Reserve, whether it be our local Federal Reserve, the IMF, the World Bank, do they need to be concerned about blockchain, or more so Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies?
I don't think there's any reason for them to be concerned. I don't think this is something, it's like I mentioned earlier, this is a speculative market. That's what drives the price, and I don't think there's really any.
Those guys they've put it in, they've created trading desk and set up markets for this. So if these are the same people that aren't worried but are setting up trading desks,
futures and options,
the futures market, which started December 31st, 2017, I think there is some level of concern on their part. I look at the Davos summit that took place in Davos, Switzerland a few weeks ago. It was a major topic amongst our financial and global elite. So somebody is concerned about it. So I'm thinking, what does that mean for those of us on Main Street, per se?
Absolutely, and you're seeing right now one of the things you need to follow is where the smart money is going. And you're seeing that Paul Singer, Elliott Management, $34 billion hedge fund, and multiple other hedge fund guys, they're shorting this cryptocurrency and Bitcoin like no other. They're saying that this is a bubble waiting to happen. One of the things that I believe JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon mentioned was that this is tulip mania. And if one of the things is...
Until he went home and found out that his daughter had two.
Exactly.
And they traded it all around in JP Morgan Chase as well. So.
For sure, because, and I agree with that point, that they did it because they were figuring out that there was a market there for a lot of the institutional investors who figured, you know what, there's a way to make money off of this. So just like any smart people, that they wanted to make money off of it as well. So I agree with you. They obviously did a big 180-degree flip, which was funny, especially when you see a guy like Jamie Dimon, who's kind of the outside of the Oracle of Omaha, and Warren Buffett, kind of the go-to guru when it comes to the financial markets, and he calls it that, saying that any trader who invests in Bitcoin or trades cryptocurrencies should be fired for being stupid. Right. And then a month later turn around and say, I believe in the blockchain technology, which is funny in and of itself.
Yep, sure.
But so going back to the point, and I think that this is one of the biggest things, is that you see a lot of these hedge funds and a lot of these smart people are shorting it like no other. They're saying that this is a bubble waiting to happen. The tulip mania happened in the Dutch Republic back in the futures market, right when it started, when the Dutch introduced the futures market in the 17th century, 1637 February, tulips were at an all-time high. And this is one of those exact same situations. It's really pretty on the surface, but they're gone in a blink of an eye. And that's kind of the best analogy I can give. But like I said, I still am a fundamental believer of the blockchain technology in and of itself. I think that it has transformational purposes for the global economy as a whole. And right now, after seeing the financial crisis, we're all students of the financial crisis because we came of age during the financial crisis. We saw the struggles that our parents went through just to try to make it out alive in those times. And literally right now, the biggest thing that we need to be taking care of as the economy is that we need to look at for more transparency, not something that's less transparent. And right now, the biggest problem with Bitcoin is that there's not enough transparency involved with it.
I think Bitcoin's more transparent than cash. I mean, you can't track cash. You can track Bitcoin. You can see every transaction that's ever happened on a public blockchain. And so you can track Bitcoin from the very first one to the last one made, and I can see it go from person to person. So on that point, I don't think it's quite fair to say that it's not traceable. It's actually very transparent. And as far as if is the government paying attention to this or they're not, Bitcoin right now is one of the top 15 world currencies, stronger than other 160 other countries in the world. Bitcoin has a market cap larger than all those other currencies. So they'd be pretty stupid not to be paying attention to it.
Justin, you were going to say something?
I mean, I was going to use another analogy. I mean, you mentioned tulips, but I think one that maybe some of us probably remember is Beanie Babies. You know, in the 90s, Beanie Babies were the hot thing. And I think there's sort of a fad mentality. I think Bitcoin has taken on a lot of the aspects of what a fad investment would really look like. And you know, Beanie Babies were the same thing in the 90s. And you know, you see these people who still have their Beanie Baby collections because they became worthless overnight. And I think we're going to see it very similar, especially if we see any formal regulation from either our country or any other the other major countries in the world regarding this technology. I think once we see regulation, the price is going to drop drastically, and a lot of people are going to lose a lot of value.
So let me ask about the regulation. Is regulation of Bitcoin necessary? And especially for a product that prides itself on deregulation. One, do we think it will be regulated? And what will that do to this currency or this store of value once the regulators do come in?
I want to kind of mention, you know, you ask if it's necessary. I mean, personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's inevitable. You know, the government is pretty good at getting into just about anything, especially once it starts gaining, you know, gaining some power and momentum. And you know, you can look at virtually any industry that starts to grow, especially at a rapid rate, and the government gets into it and regulates it. So, do I think it's necessary? I mean, there could maybe be some necessary regulations that could be argued, but I think it is definitely inevitable. It will happen someday.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. It's definitely going to happen. The difference is they can try to regulate it as much as they want, but they cannot shut Bitcoin down. Right. Technology is out of the bag. Pandora's box has been open. And if the U.S. government tries to regulate it, similar to how China regulated it, Bitcoin won't die. It just will die in the U.S. and in China, and it will exist in all the other countries of the world. And unfortunately, China and the U.S. will miss out on the massive innovation that's coming from from Bitcoin. So yeah, they're going to try to regulate it as much as they can, but in order to shut Bitcoin off, you got to shut the internet off in the entire world, and good luck trying to do that.
Yeah, that's not gonna
But what about all the other cryptocurrencies? I know, obviously, behind Bitcoin is blockchain, and there's Ripple, there's Ether, there are all these other ones that are out there. So, and you're seeing all these initial cryptocurrency offerings coming to market that are just literally the same thing that Bitcoin was, but coming out of thin air. So once one gets regulated, gets backed by a federal government that has the full faith and backing of a United States Treasury Department or whatnot, then all the other ones you're going to see value go down the drain, right?
Well, no, and the reason why is because all these other cryptocurrencies aren't necessarily competing against Bitcoin. Some of them are. You have Litecoin, and Ripple is more of a payments technology than it is a currency. But you have all these use cases of blockchain technology, Bitcoin being a currency use case, and there are literally thousands of other use cases of cryptocurrencies. And we use the term cryptocurrency. A better term would be a digital asset or a token. And that's kind of what Ethereum is, this platform for all these other tokens where we now have a tokenization of 1 kilowatt hour of energy, or tokenization of ownership of a house, or tokenization of the ownership of a car, or 1 gigahash of storage or of computational power. And so there aren't things that are all competing. And so the future, I really think, is going to be tokenized. And whether or not Bitcoin is the one to win, I don't know if that's the right answer or not. And maybe one of the other ones will, win out over Bitcoin. But I think there will be a future that is tokenized, and there will be many winners. I think thousands and honestly hundreds of thousands of tokens for every little niche market, all the way to the largest ones.
One of the things obviously, since you consider yourself an expert on, I want to ask your opinion on what about the energy and efficiency of the whole market as itself, the mining that takes into account just mining Bitcoin, as we mentioned, the half-life of it, and it will eventually run out. The fixed supply runs out in 2140, roughly 20 years from now.
Sure.
But right now, the current operations of all the companies who are trying to actively mine Bitcoin, including not just in the U.S. but in Iceland, is the equivalent of 2 to 3 million homes being powered by energy consumption.
Sure. Yeah. So I think Bitcoin uses a hashing algorithm to maintain and secure its blockchain called proof of work, or proof of work is the name of the algorithm, I guess. And there are other ways of securing and maintaining a blockchain as well, through proof of stake and other hybrid methods that are much less energy intensive. What's cool about Bitcoin and blockchain as a whole is that it's upgradable. So yeah, it is really energy intensive right now. I think there's a big argument to say, is the US dollar also energy intensive, to transport it, to store it, to print it, all those kind of things? I think there's a big argument to be made on that. But even if you avoid that, Bitcoin is programmable money, and so it can be upgraded, and these methods of how we secure and maintain the network can be fixed to be less energy intensive. And Ethereum, for example, is working on a proof of stake method, which is much less energy intensive, and other blockchains as well have their own way of going about it that are less energy intensive as well. So I think there's going to be a solution for that.
Absolutely.
So what should the average person do before diving in? Because as you guys have stated, it's kind of in a hysteria, and I would say the last quarter of 2017, it really came into the American lexicon. I think our media flooded the airwaves purposefully. But now, here we are in 2018, and everyone is talking about Bitcoin. Everyone's talking about blockchain. What should the average person consider before diving in, or what should they keep their eyes and ears open for?
This would be my personal recommendation. I'm never going to buy it, personally. But I would recommend, before anybody ever considers investing in any product, really, is do a lot of research before investing in anything, a stock market or bonds or Bitcoin or name your investment. Always do your research first. And the next thing I would recommend, especially in a highly volatile market like Bitcoin, it's very volatile. It goes up and down every day, pretty drastically, and pretty unlike most investments. And what I would recommend is, if you're going to use Bitcoin as an investment, then you better make sure you're debt-free and that you have plenty of disposable income, because could very easily, this is a type of technology I think you could lose your money overnight very easily. It's just like playing penny stocks. You could lose your lose your money overnight. And so if you're not debt free and you don't have plenty of disposable income, I would never recommend somebody using it as an investment tool.
Yeah, and I think for the most part I agree with that. I mean, Bitcoin is very volatile. It's a very new technology. It's been around for 8 years. It's still an experiment. By no means am I saying everything is fixed and solved. And really, like you said, before you go into any investment, you should understand it, you should research it, you should really know it in and out. And I think with Bitcoin as well, you can't go into it short-sighted because it is very volatile. You've got to be investing for the long term. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not something you get into and 3 months later you get out. This is a technology that's going to absolutely transform the world and touch every single industry. Bitcoin, the currency world, but blockchain technology, every other industry. And so, with that, that's not something that's going to play out in the next 3 months or 6 months. It's something that's going to take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, just like the internet did. And so if you're a long-term investor, I think you're much safer off. And I would recommend going into it with that mindset.
Well, and you bring up the way the internet was, and I think it's similar to the internet. I know, I can't remember the gentleman's name from Newsweek, 1995, who wrote a fascinating piece for anyone who wants to go back, and said the internet would fail and named all these reasons why the internet would fail. And here we are 20 years later, and the internet is stronger now, which I think is kind of the next iteration, even as we look at currency. And so a lot of those .coms from 94, 95 to about 2000 had this value, sort of, and then in 2001 they crashed. But the internet, the .coms went away, but the internet was here to stay. And so to your point, you said, I don't know if it's going to be Bitcoin, but the reality is blockchain is here. And if blockchain stays, then we have to trust there will be a currency that will be on that platform and kind of ride it out.
Absolutely. I know Cam just mentioned the comparison to the internet. I want to take it a step further and want to hear your opinion on this, because this was one of the comparisons I heard, was one of the best parallel comparisons I heard to Bitcoin itself was Napster. And I know that might sound odd at first, but Napster, as everyone knows, was a peer-to-peer music file sharing service that literally got shut down because of copyright infringement. But it ultimately fundamentally changed the music industry for the better, or worse, however you want to look at it, based on the winners or losers of it.
Yep.
But I think it's more of a better comparison than the internet as a whole, is that I think Bitcoin has the opportunity, like we talked about, like blockchain, to fundamentally transform currency as we know it, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to be Bitcoin in the current form that it is.
Right. Yeah, and my bet on it right now is that it will be Bitcoin. We don't know yet. I think the best, kind of going back to where we are with the internet, right now we're basically in like the early 90s where we were with the internet. And so we're in infrastructure level. These are all experiments. These are things that haven't been played out yet, and they will be in the future, so time will tell.
What do you think the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is going to be a few decades from now?
I don't want to speculate on it.
and that'll be for the next show. We are out of time this morning. I want to thank our guest. This was a riveting conversation. We are just at the beginning of it. There will be numerous uses of blockchain. Bitcoin right now is all the rage. I would hope that people do their research. I want to thank you guys for appearing with us this morning. And for you, the viewer, please do your research. Thank you very much for tuning in this morning.